And in a global pandemic, in unprecedented circumstances, we needed to make sure that there was business continuity, that we were addressing questions, that we were being transparent, that we were aligning the business, because we needed everyone to link arms, hold tight, and shoulder through this uncertainty together. And I learned a ton of lessons during that period there, and how welcomed the other departments were. HR was an incredible partner to us, welcomed our ideas, welcomed our perspective, and taught us a lot along the way about the people management organization and how that downstream impacts employees and what challenges they have.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples. Not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz. Real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
FUD. Fear, uncertainty, doubt. I first learned about this sales and marketing tactic, which is aimed at influencing perceptions by highlighting potential negative outcomes, early in my career when working with big tech companies. Here, I'll give you an example. Here's an example of FUD. Nobody ever got fired for buying IBM, right? But then later in my career, when I worked with cybersecurity companies, oh my gosh, I saw the tactic on steroids. The world was falling apart according to cybersecurity. So I always wondered, is this really the most effective way to treat our potential customers? Is this customer-first marketing? There's got to be a better way. So I rejoiced when I saw an anti-FUD lesson in a recent podcast guest application. Joining me now to share the lesson, along with many more lesson-filled stories, is Nick Lagalante, a B2B fractional marketing executive at Lagalante Consulting. Thank you for joining me, Nick.
Daniel, thank you for having me. Stoked to be here.
All right, so let's take a quick look at Nick's background so you know who I'm talking to. He was a marketing and public relations manager for Thycotic, which is now part of Delinea. He was a head of global corporate communications at Cofense, the director of global corporate communications at Tenable. He's currently a volunteer on the board of directors for the Public Relations Society of America for the National Capital Chapter. And he now works for his own consulting company, where he works with startups that have raised anywhere from $3 million to over $100 million. So Nick, give us a sense. What is your day like being a B2B fractional marketing executive?
Yeah. So what's interesting, especially being a consultant, is you're balancing a little bit of everything, right? You are your front office, you're your back office, you're your own marketing staff, sales staff, financial staff. So it's very different from what I usually have done in my career, which is in-house, corporate role, team leader, in the corporate mix. But what I think is really interesting about that is it gives you the benefit to have certain levels of freedom, certain levels of access, and it doesn't restrict you the way working in a corporation might restrict somebody. So in my day-to-day, it might include prospecting, networking with potential clients, obviously engaging current clients, carving out time for project work, carving out time for the actual service delivery, but also doing back office stuff, taxes. So I try to block my week out and have certain days where I dedicate just to admin. And then I have days where I dedicate to my services so that my clients are getting 100% of my attention, because the way that I structure my consulting is it's not so much it's Nick on an island, let's send Nick some work and then he sends it back to us. I embed myself within the organization as a fractional leader. I find that given my corporate background, I've been doing this close to 20 years. I understand how startups work. I understand how growth stage, kind of that mid-life cycle, pre-IPO, pre-acquisition stage works, and the public sector, public corporations. So being able to come into an organization as a fractional executive allows me to weave into the fabric of where they are so I can be as effective as possible. And I think breaking the time up throughout the week and treating it like I'm sort of an extended or augmented member of their leadership team allows me to be so much more effective, and we get a lot more done than if I'm just shipping projects off. So I try to structure my week that way. And set my days up in these blocks. So I'm giving 100% of my attention to the right people at the right time.
Yeah, I interviewed someone who would literally wear different hats to be like, okay, this hat, this is my focus now, right? Because you got to kind of do everything. All right, we talk about that 20-year career. Let's unpack it. Let's see what we can learn.
Yeah,
So I like
sure.
to say that, I've never been in another career, but in marketing, we make things, right? We're not, like I've never been a podiatrist or an actuary, but I don't feel like they make things like we do. So let's take a look at some of the things you made and some of the lessons from them. You said consultative selling sharpens your message. How'd you learn that lesson?
Yeah, I learned that lesson working at a company called Thycotic, which at the time was the small IT software company. It wasn't even sure it wanted to be or was a cybersecurity company. Part of the work that I did there was a lot of brand work and positioning work to sort of transform this IT software company into a true blue cybersecurity company in the privileged access management space. So, kind of managing passwords and identities at the machine level. And when I joined the company, they were really small, you know, bootstrapped, no funding, about 25 employees. And it was the first company I had worked in the past, early in my career, my first full time marketing job. I worked for an insurance company. And the insurance company was split between B2B and B2C products and services. So while I got a touch of B2B, I would say the insurance company was like probably 60% consumer lines of insurance. So Thycotic was really the first company that was truly B2B. That was my first foray into the B2B business world, specifically the B2B technology world. And I remember I was going to RSA, which is the largest cybersecurity conference in the world. It still is to this day. And it was my first cyber trade show in which Thycotic was an exhibitor. And so I was there helping out with the booth, kind of learning the ropes. And this is where I learned the power of consultative selling, using it as a marketing and messaging tool. When I was in the booth, I was kind of observing how sales reps and even some of the marketing folks were engaging and talking with customers. And rather than it being just this, as soon as someone comes to the booth, this like pure play product pitch or just screaming out features or yelling about features, it started with questions. Hey, tell me about your role. Tell me about your pain points. What are you working on today? What are your biggest challenges in your team? Do you have challenges around identities? Do you have challenges around password management? Do you have challenges around password security? Things like that. And as the prospect would start to talk, you would see the wheels spinning in the in the sales consultant's mind. You would see the wheels spinning, and you would start to notice that the way that they interacted with the prospect after that was much more effective because they were able to tailor their message, their sales pitch. And you're at a trade show; you only have a few minutes of attention for each of these prospects. And because they took that consultative approach, they asked questions first. They really understood the pain and the needs first. They were able to weave a story together that wasn't just a laundry list of product features, but really a value first driven message to talk about how that product or how that service solved an actual problem. And when the lights went off, when the light bulb went off on the customer's face, it was clear and they were able to get tons and tons of leads. Whereas, there were companies that were exhibiting right next to us with 2 or 3 times size the booth, all kinds of bells and whistles, and they were not able to get nearly the amount of quality leads that Thycotic was, because Thycotic started off as a consultancy before it became a software company. So as a marketer, we're so focused, right, on the message, and we're so focused on reaching those audiences and engaging with them and getting them excited that sometimes we forget, especially in B2B, that we are there to solve a problem. We're problem solvers. And so we need to understand their pains and speak to them directly rather than just, machine gun a ton of product features at them. And so that lesson in those early days of Thycotic at those trade shows actually made me a better marketer, made me a better writer. It made me more effective at reaching those audiences because we took the time to understand their pains. And then we can craft a message and deliver it the right way that it really speaks to the prospect. And we can move them along that funnel. We can move them along to that demo stage. And once we did a demo, we knew we'd have them hooked because it was a great product. And it kind of sold itself at that point. So that was a huge lesson, and frankly, something that I carry with me and implement to this day.
You said you carry that forward as a marketer, but I want to ask you this. Do you have any examples? Have you used consultative approach as a PR person in PR?
Oh,
Because,
yeah,
because
for
let me tell you,
sure.
like for me, here's an example. I interviewed Stacy Grissom, the director of content and communications at Bark. And one of her lessons was a viral moment can tie into a PR sprint. She told the story of they had a birthday for the last surviving rescue dog from 9/11, right? Through a birthday party. They did something of value. And they got picked up everywhere. New York Times, Atlantic, they had all this pickup, right? But I get a ton of PR pitches, right? So for the articles, I don't track them for the articles, but I actually do track the applications for How I Made It Marketing podcast because, sometimes when I have to tell people, usually the PR reps, hey, this person was not selected, it just helps to kind of give them the numbers and have that big understanding there. And so, for example, we've gotten 4,107 podcast guest applications and we've published 131 episodes, right? So it just shows like that volume. And what I don't see, I see the machine gun. I don't see the consultative approach in PR. So I want to ask, do you have an example of using that consultative approach? Because I'd love to be receiving it. Occasionally I do, but it's mostly the machine gun. Hey, here's the thing we want to talk about. Talk about our thing. Here it is. Link to it.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And it actually comes back to, I would argue that it comes back to a bigger philosophical question that you see a lot in our industry, which is what is the relationship between PR and marketing? Should PR be a part of marketing? Should PR be a standalone thing? Is comms PR? Where does it all sit? Who should report to who? And there's lots and lots of very sharp opinions about this. I think it depends on the industry, but in my industry, in B2B tech, especially in security, PR for a vendor is a marketing function, in my opinion, because it is another way to take your message and deliver it to your audience. And your audience, your most important audience, are your customers, your prospects, the people that keep your business running and afloat. And so from a PR point of view, if we're not looking to generate earned coverage and tell those stories through the press, through media relations, through those PR mechanics, understanding what the customer needs, we've missed the boat entirely. We need to understand as PR people in B2B, we actually have to understand the business in order to tell the best stories, earn the best coverage, and really have the strongest partnerships and relationships with the journalists that we know will reach those customers and those audiences. And it means understanding what the customer needs and understanding how the business truly operates. Because the stories that are data-driven have the best hooks, and you can't get that data, whether it's research data that your company's generating or customer data, that you're leveraging to tell an interesting trend line, if we don't actually understand the business. And so I've actually been talking with PR practitioners right now in this current market who are looking at ways to strengthen their profile in this sort of uncertain job market. How do I land that next job? How do I be as strong of a PR person as possible? And I always tell them, make sure that you know that whatever industry you're working in and whatever company you're working for, understand their business top to bottom, understand how their products work, what their customers, who their customers are, what their needs are, and what their pain points are. Because if you do that, and even listen and talk to customers and listen in on sales conversations, it'll give you ideas and help you think about the right hooks that not only will impress the editors and the journalists you're influencing, but ultimately will be the most compelling stories for those reading those articles, those intended audiences, those intended customers. So it's super, super important. I think that, when PR sits in its own world, and is kind of treated just as a news engine at a company or just a crisis management engine, you lose the total value and capability of that function when it's not more deeply integrated into engaging with and moving the customer along that journey. So I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Like when I was at Thycotic, I'll bring the Thycotic back up again. Thycotic actually did not have a PR function. Right? Because when I joined, they were super small. Their marketing team was a small handful of people. We all wore lots of hats. Over time, while I was there, I recognized that there was a missing piece, a missing link here in that PR and communications function. But because we started off kind of wearing lots of those hats in marketing and had that consultative energy built into the equation, I remember when I stood up our very first PR program at Thycotic, one of the first things that I did was I went to our head of sales. I said, give me the list of our top 5 happiest customers, and I'm going to go and talk to them with our agency partner. So I had hired a PR agency, and the two of us, my agency director, myself, and our sales leader, we got in front of 5 customers. We just talked to them. What are you seeing? What's important to you? Why do you still work with us? What are your pain points? What's happening in the market? Where do you wish things were going? And just from those conversations alone, we came up with like dozens of pitch ideas, story ideas. Then we would map those story ideas to say, okay, what do we have to show for it? Went to the engineering department. What kind of research can we share publicly? What kind of data can we share publicly? And are any of these customers willing to go on record with us? And out of 5 or 6, maybe there was 1 or 2, but we use that to tell stories. And as a result, we would get tons of coverage, really strong coverage. And slowly, this tiny little company that no one had ever heard of, that wasn't even in the security space, started to move its way from a reputation standpoint into being recognized as a leader and one of the category defining leaders of privilege access management as that segment of security became hot. I'm not saying PR takes all the credit, but I think the way that we took that consultative approach, listened to our customers, we knew the business inside and out, we knew what data we could share, we were able to tell much more effective stories than just spraying and praying a bunch of ideas at the wall, hoping journalists write about it, hoping the CEO's background is strong enough to get published or win a speaking opportunity. And that lesson is something that not only I bring into all of my roles and have brought into my roles since then. It's something that I teach. It's something that I mentor my teams on because I think it's the way that you become the most effective in B2B PR is that consultative approach.
Yeah. So let me push back on one piece, or you feel free to disagree with me because there's something I didn't hear. So when you talk about the consultative approach, isn't the journalist and the editor the customer? I mean, I hear you. You say understand the business. I hear you. You say understand the end customers, a story they need. I hear you. But the biggest gap I see, at least being on the receiving end, is a lot of PR reps or people pitching PR, they don't understand the journalist and the editor. That is your first customer. And that's where you need to take the consultative approach and have a value proposition for them and have them understand why of all these different pitches they're getting, it's this pitch and this is right, not just generally, but for their audience, for their publication, for whatever you're going after. Versus, as you say, the much more common thing is the spray and pray approach. So am I wrong on this? Isn't that the first customer?
You're not wrong, but maybe you and I have different terminologies around customer.
Sure.
But that aside, Daniel, I completely agree with you. That's where the spray and pray comes in. That happens a lot. And to me, part of that consultative approach, understanding the customers, understanding the needs of the business, understanding what data we can share, that is all in service to understanding, to your point, who are you pitching? So when you think about, okay, ultimately, if I need to reach this audience, right, that's the end goal. I need to get this message here over to this audience here through PR, through earned media. Now I'm going to pick, okay, whether it's a series of podcasts, whether it's publications, trade pubs, business pubs, whoever. And I make a list of my journalists, what editors, what pubs are doing the best job reaching the audience that I need to engage with. That, to me, understanding the journalists' needs, their beat, their reporting styles, that's just table stakes research that every PR person should understand. You should not be taking a pitch and bringing it to a journalist that you haven't actually really thought out. Is this the right pitch? Is this the right story for this journalist, for their editors, for their audiences? Because it's very relationship driven and it's trust driven. And if you're new to that game, or especially if you're a new vendor, you have to be able to come correct right out of the gate. Because to your point, being on the media side, you're receiving tons of pitches all day long from corporate PR people, from agency people, from consultants, you name it. How do you sift through the noise? And there's a lot of noise out there. And so I think that the consultative mindset applies as much to knowing who your media partners are, knowing these journalists, understanding, reading through their beat, reading through what they like to talk about, what's important to them. Same thing for the editors at the publications. But I see them less as a customer and more as a critical stakeholder in order to reach that customer. So it's terminology, slight disagreement or slight differentiation. But at the end of the day, broadly speaking, I agree with your point. It's on us as PR practitioners to know and understand our journalists' needs. But that's why matching that story, right, with the right journalist is it's better to go out with just a couple of pitches to the right journalists and the right pubs than to just take a story and try to get it in every publication possible. And sometimes PR people feel pressure from the executive suite. Well, we want to be everywhere. We want to be here. We want to be there. That's why it's up to us, knowing the business, understanding marketing, understanding how to demonstrate that value. We can communicate that back up to the executive suite and say, actually, for this story, it's better that we go to these three journalists. And here's why. A, we're going to have a better opportunity and chance at influencing either a mention, inclusion, or a byline, or whatever the intention is with the pitch. B, we're going to strengthen the relationship and the trust with that media partner. And C, it's going to make their audiences happy because it's a story that's relevant to them. And ultimately, that audience is our customers or our prospective customers or our investors. These are the people that we're trying to reach. So if you, in that consultative approach, understanding the media needs, the journalist needs, and thinking through that and making tough decisions about the execution of the pitch is critical. And it's as critical as talking to the customers.
No, I mean, I can't disagree with quality over quantity. So we're on the same page there. So speaking of really understanding your customer, you mentioned you don't need to scare people to sell them security. And I love this. How did you learn this?
So, in the cyber industry, and I've spent a majority of my career now working in the security space, it's an obvious, I think, low-hanging fruit marketing mechanism is to use fear, uncertainty, and doubt to drive interest or, drive demand for a certain product. And to a point, there's an understanding as to why, because we are securing organizations against bad actors, against malicious actors. There's a lot of bad energy out there, and we're protecting against attacks, right? Companies are under active attack, or they are actively being exploited for any manner of reasons. It's causing all these issues. And that's the root of what security does. But what I think has happened over the last 10 to 15 years is that it's kind of become the default tonality when you go to a trade show or you have like news season or throughout the year, different parts of the quarter where you have vendors just, lambasting audiences with marketing campaigns. There's a lot of default on fear-driven messaging, scare tactic-driven messaging, uncertainty, in order to drive that excitement and demand. But I think there's actually different ways that you can do that without having to always live in the negative. I'm going to go back to Thycotic again. Thycotic did not start off as a security company. Thycotic started off as an IT software startup who was trying to make IT administrators' lives easier by handling their privileged passwords in an automated fashion. We're here to make your life easy. So the company that wound up becoming a category-defining leader in the security marketplace in privileged access management started off selling their products and building a customer base around the idea that we're going to save you time, we're going to save you effort, we are going to make your life easier. And that resonated, especially with the practitioners. Security is often one of the most underrepresented technological resource groups in an organization. You still have, I think, a gap, an education gap in terms of, people that are coming out of university level education with security degrees versus IT degrees versus the other parts of the business, finance, marketing, et cetera. And these teams are overworked. They're stressed out. And so there's ways as marketers, as communicators to demonstrate the value of a security product and platform beyond just, hey, if you don't get this, you're going to get breached tomorrow and your whole world is going to end and everyone's going to get fired and your CISO is going to go to jail. While that might be a reality potentially for some, there's a broader story here. Your product does so much more than just quell anxiety. It delivers business value. It delivers operational excellence. It helps create speed and efficiency. Something that we're seeing now, especially in the SecOps space, is this explosion of AI conversations around agentic AI, agent-based AI. And what's interesting is you have a whole series of security startups now that aren't really going to market with a fear-based message. They're going to market with an efficiency-based message with, hey, if you have a team of 2 SecOps analysts that are just getting bombarded in your SOC, in your security operations center with, false positives and anomalic behaviors and weird stuff that could potentially be threats, how are they managing this all and not burning out? Burnout is real. And so the selling point is not, hey, you're going to get breached and your world is going to end. The selling point is, hey, we need to take care of these people better. We need to give your team better efficiency, force multipliers in their capabilities, operational scale. And this is where agentic AI is like huge. And there's tons of security companies as big as SentinelOne and as sort of startup-y as companies like Torque, which have amazing marketing and doing amazing stuff out there. But it's amazing to see that the new kids on the block are starting to take a different marketing approach because they're realizing that the same old scare you into buying our stuff doesn't work as much anymore. It's kind of become the, yeah, we get it. Breaches are real. We got breached 4 times last month. What else have you got to say? Rather than when I started, 15 years ago in this space, it was all about, the fear of what could happen because security was just becoming this sort of more pervasive topic, this national topic. So what I learned at Thycotic, I've applied at FishMe, Cofense, and 1000% at Tenable becomes a more business level conversation than just a fear-based one.
Okay, so just kind of maybe channeling the listeners I hear, like if the listeners that are using FUD right now, I think this is the challenge they would give you, and I just wonder how you'd answer it. But how do you get their attention? Right. So yes, you've got really good point. I love what you're saying. And I agree with you about have an actual value proposition. And some of the value propositions you're talking about are about efficiency make a lot of sense. And I've actually given this feedback before when I've coached on, cybersecurity, is that most companies, and this is more to a small business cybersecurity, those small business people, they're not sitting there. They didn't go in business to worry about cybersecurity. Your message should be, hey, the cybersecurity company for people who don't care about it, right? Because 99% of the time, this isn't going to happen. It's not going to be your issue. You want to focus on other things.
Right.
So let's have usability in some of the other things. However, I think the reason we get to the FUD approach, yes, is to close sales. But as you said, it's a noisy world. And so I think they use it to okay, grab attention. So I could see in the middle of that conversation, customer journey funnel, a lot of that messaging you're saying work. But can you grab attention with it still? Can you actually get into the market, someone notices you, and you can start that conversation? Or do you have to scare the living daylights out of them?
I think it's a great question. And I think that we're at this interesting evolution point in the cyber market where you're starting to see marketing shift, really depending on the vendor. Every vendor has a different sales motion. So you have some vendors that are really large, really established, that tend to do a top-down sales motion. We're focusing on the C-suite first, and then we'll move our way down to the practitioner pool in terms of the buy-in and the sale. You have other vendors, a lot of them are startups, that are actually taking a bottom-up approach. They're starting with the practitioners and addressing the practitioner need, getting the buy-in and excitement from the practitioners, and then leveraging that practitioner relationship to sort of work the sale up to maybe to middle management and then up through the executive suite to ultimately get the sale. So I think getting that attention without using FUD really depends on what kind of vendor you are and what your selling motion is. For example, there's a company out there right now that does hyper automation, agentic AI, a lot of cool stuff in the SecOps space. I mentioned them. They're called Torque, Torq. What Torque is doing from a marketing point of view, in my opinion, is actually quite fascinating because what they're actually doing is they're creating this amazing rock and roll, like reminds me of 80s Iron Maiden heavy metal rock brand that I think is just crushing it, especially with the practitioner into like the middle management community, security professionals, based on their personal interest, the music they listen to, the sort of cultural pop culture IP that they like. None of that has really much to do with fear. It's kind of like this empowering, kick-ass rock and roll skulls with lightning bolts and monster trucks. None of that. It's very different departure from the hoodies and the bad actors are coming to get you. And this is like, hey, we got our like rock horns in the air. We got our guitars. We have our lightning bolts. Like, come talk to us. We're approaching this in a real different way. Hyper automation, AI, faster, better, stronger. And they're using that to build a very, very highly engaged brand for themselves. And they also have a great product to boot. And the practitioners are going nuts. They're loving this stuff. They're building lots of hype around RSA. They're approaching it from a different point of view. They're building a different brand. They're standing out in the crowd because no one else looks and sounds like them. And then when you actually listen to their podcast, you read their marketing materials, they've got the technical chops to back it up. They're just packaging it in a way that is invoking in an excitement and kind of like an empowerment of like, hey, like, let's say goodbye. Like, their tagline is SOAR is dead. SOAR stands for security operations and automation. It was like this whole hot marketplace maybe 5 to 7 years ago. It kind of was the precursor to AI automation that we're seeing in SecOps now. They're saying SOAR is dead. Automation is the key. Hyper automation, AI is the key. And they've got skulls and lightning bolts. That's how they're getting attention. Not a single piece of that message, not a single piece of that visual brand has anything to do with scaring you. It's exciting you. And the product and the technology backs it up. Now, when you do the flip side, you look at brands, another brand I admire, which is totally different. SentinelOne, for example, massive endpoint detection response company, one of the critical dominant category leaders in EDR, one of the hottest cybersecurity companies and brands in the marketplace today. They have a different approach because they're taking a much more executive down, top-down approach. So when you look at their content, you look at their corporate messaging, their campaigns, their PR, it's very much, hey, we're going to help be a partner to your C-suite so you can show at the board level, look at how we are protecting the organization and how managing endpoint security, managing threat detection response actually translates into business value. The way they package things, even their earnings reports and their earnings communications, it's very similar to how, let's say, a high-end business publication would package up a financial report. They're speaking to a different audience. They've got a different sales motion, and they're not using FUD. They're not using scare tactics. They're translating security into business value in a really artful way. And it's still hip. It's still very fresh. I love their brand. I think they have a great approach. But once again, it's not the hoodies. It's not scaring you. It's demonstrating we're the right partner to help your organization scale and deliver board value. And so these are the things that are starting to change in the security marketplace. And I think the vendors that are still super focused on fear as their primary driver, they're not it. They are going to get left behind in the dust pretty quickly. The last example that I'll make is Beyond Trust, which is a great company in the privileged access management space. They're a Delinea competitor. And Beyond Trust just announced their RSA campaign. And it's all about, they're calling themselves Beyond Trust Outfitters. It kind of reminds me of like Patagonia meets REI. It's outdoors. It's let's go through. We're going to enter the wilderness, but don't worry. We have the tools. We have the carabiners. We have the ropes. We have all the tools to help you navigate the uncertainties, but it's also adventure driven. So it's not, hey, there's a dark, scary pit. You're going to get swallowed up by these attackers. It's the sun is shining. The sky is blue. The trees are green. Let's go on this journey. Let's go on a hike together. And we're going to be right by your side. Like a wilderness guide, helping you understand what might be around the corner, but discovering really cool things along the way. So we're starting to see such a shift. That's how you get attention. You get creative and you think about all of the other ways that your product adds value to the organization. And then you tailor it to who you're speaking to, who you're driving that selling motion for.
I love it. It's aspirational. It's not the Hamburglar, right? The Hamburglar was a traditional campaign we saw. And really, you can be aspirational in any industry. I was interviewing the CMO of Gelmar, which makes Tarnex and CLR, like these toilet cleaning products. She was telling me about this aspirational campaign they did. And I was mentioning, like, actually, that weekend I was cleaning the toilets with my wife with CLR. There's nothing aspirational about this. You're deluding yourself. And then she talked about this research they did, and they found out, like, hey, a real key thing in relationships is to feel taken care of. One spouse is they're cleaning. That's a key thing, and the other spouse loves it. Valentine's Day, don't buy chocolates, don't buy roses, buy CLR and clean the toilet. And I just was like, wow, the brilliance of that, to go for the aspirational thing versus, hey, you've got this messy house. So speaking of research, as you mentioned, research-driven rebranding preserves value. So tell me the story of rebranding from PhishMe to CoFence and where research would have helped.
Yeah, I think every brand exercise um, has its lessons. What worked and what worked well, what didn't work so well, and every opportunity is a chance to sort of tweak and learn, so that the next time you help a company go through that journey, you sort of learn from those from all of those experiences. And I think what was interesting about Fishman CoFence is that we knew that the company needed some kind of a rebrand. The company started off, a little bit of history. FishMe started off as the company that essentially invented the technology to fake fish your employees for the purpose of training, immersive behavioral change by actually putting them through the motions of a real phishing attack and not just making them watch a 15-minute computer-based training where they're falling asleep at their computers and they don't retain any information. Computer-based training really is not as effective when it comes to preventing phishing threats at the employee level. So if a phishing email makes its way through all your security controls, your email security gateways, and lands in your employee's inbox as it is ought to do, how are your employees spotting it, reporting it, and flagging it, immersing them in real attacks and teaching them the markers and what to look for, getting them to think like a security professional? That's where they started. And they dominated that category. They sort of created that category. They sort of evolved a new version of awareness training with this immersive technology, and they were doing really well for a while. But then what happened? Over the years, that category became saturated. You have lots of companies that started entering that space. So FishMe wanted to differentiate with other products, get more into the threat intelligence space, get more into managed services around like proactively defending around phishing with, a team of 24/7 analysts that are in your environment helping you spot phishing attacks, maybe where your employees aren't able to spot them. Getting into triaging of attacks in the SOC. So when there's an attack, what happens? How do you respond to it? How do you coordinate your incident response team with your security operations people and your other security folks to kind of identify that attack and address it in real time so it doesn't become an issue? But the problem was that everyone just thought of PhishMe as the awareness training company. Well, all you do is the phishing simulations, the phishing reporting. And so the company knew that it had a bit of a brand issue because of its legacy success. And like many companies that often were one of the first movers and shakers in a category, you find that category saturated and you need to change the game. I think where we could have done a better job around research is understanding, I think, a little bit more about what that market really wanted. What was the appetite for some of these other elements, right, that the company was building around threat intel, and how do we actually build a cohesive brand, a cohesive story around that without losing the power and the equity of the FishMe name, because it was super, super resounding with the community at the time. People just loved the brand. It was super recognized, and the customers loved the product. They were really loyal. And I think that if we had better research around our own customers and the market, I'm not sure the company would have gone full bore with a new name change and a new logo. I think looking back, the things we could have done differently working on that in that world and working on that project is we probably needed more of a brand positioning refresh than a total rebrand. Because one of the challenges that happened is once we launched as CoFence, there was confusion because we retired the Fish Me name pretty much completely. We shifted it from a corporate brand to a product name only. And there was confusion in the market. The market thought that a company called Cofence bought FishMe and acquired us, which wasn't the case. There were other confusions what happened to FishMe. And it definitely caused some challenges for the company. It caused some challenges in go-to-market and with our customers. And when you have some of that confusion and those challenges, the whole point of the rebrand, which is a shift in the perception, a shift in our message and our value add, hey, we're more than just this. Work with us for X, Y, and Z. That gets lost because then the attention completely becomes, well, what is this? And I'm confused by this. And I need to learn more and learn about what's going on here. Even at like the trade shows, we were getting customers coming up to the booth saying, hey, explain this to me again. How did that work? So I think stronger research would have made us, I think, make some different changes in the approach. And I think we would have messaged it and handled our go-to-market, our comms, enabling the company, enabling customers in a different way. And later on, well after I had left, they realized that there was such brand power in the FishMe name. They actually brought it back into the corporate brand. So I think now they're going by FishMe Cofence, or it's some kind of combination of the two. And if you look at a lot of their marketing work now, the FishMe logo and the Cofence logo is often side by side to sort of pull back in some of the residual value of the power of that FishMe name. And so if we had a little bit different or better research from the market, from our customers, maybe we wouldn't have made that same choice. Maybe we would have. But certainly the biggest lesson that I took away was really understand what you need to do. Not every rebrand needs to be an entire brand new everything. Sometimes this is simple as a little bit of visual tweaking and a lot of messaging tweaking, and that's all the market needs in order to embrace the new version of you, embrace the products that you have to sell now, and allow you to enter new markets, new TAMs, new categories in a really efficient way.
Yeah, you're going to learn it one way or other. Better to learn before.
Exactly.
Well, in the first half of the episode, we talked about lessons from the things we made. And that's one of the things that we make, brands. In the second half, we talk about lessons from the people that we collaborated with to make them. But before we get there, I should mention that the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is underwritten by MECLabs AI, the parent company of Marketing Sherpa. You can get conversion-focused training from the lab that helped pioneer the conversion industry in our AI Guild, along with a community to collaborate with. Grab your free 3-month scholarship to the AI Guild at join.meclabsai.com. That's join.meclabsai.com to start getting artificial intelligence working for you. All right, well, let's talk about some of the people you collaborated with, Nick, and what you learned from them. You mentioned Brian Alberti, the current Senior Director of PR at Tenable. And from Brian, you learned genuine partnerships redefine tech PR. How'd you learn this from Brian?
Yeah. Oh, man. I love Brian. I just had dinner with him recently. He's not only a very long time trusted colleague, he's a super close friend. Brian was the first PR agency person, agency director, agency leader that I worked with, like officially in my career. So going back to my days at Thycotic, when it was time to build out that PR function, stand up a communications team, stand up a communications function, I had interviewed with lots of different PR firms because I knew I couldn't do it on my own, and I needed scale and I needed the pros to help us build those stories and break into the market the right way. And so I interviewed a bunch of different agencies. All of them focused on tech PR in one way, shape, or form. Some of them were a little bit more security focused than others, which at that time was kind of a new thing in terms of building vertical practices at a PR firm. Security was starting to emerge as its own practice, not just technology. And Brian at the time was working for an amazing firm, a boutique firm out of Boston called Davies Murphy Group. The founders of that firm are just amazing, amazing people. And after I had spoken with very large agencies owned by Publicis, owned by MSL Group, I was talking to this boutique firm and I loved what they had to say. They had an energy about them that was just amazing. They reminded me of how I thought about things. And for the tiny little company that we were and the pittance of retainer that we were able to muster up budget for at the time, Davies Murphy Group, they were not shocked about that or scared about that. And they were like, let's do this. We love working with small companies. We love, building the brand at this stage. And we think we would be a great partner. So I decided to move forward with DMG. And Brian was assigned to our account as our account director. And he led a small team. I think it was like 2 or 3 people on the agency team led by Brian. And Brian was a strategist, PR leader, writer. The guy literally just does everything. And he got his start, I believe, at Weber Shandwick and really cut his teeth and started specializing in tech PR and really specializing in security, which was this hot emerging market. So working with Brian in that capacity where I was the client, he was the agency lead, and we had a partnership. We had a true partnership. And it taught me the lesson that anytime that you hire contractors or outside third-party support, whether it's marketing firms, PR firms, agencies, solo contractors, whatever the case is, consultants, it's really important that you weave them into the inner workings of the team and give them the information that they need so they can be as effective as possible. You treat them like an extension of the team. I learned that from Brian because he treated me like his colleague. There was no sales pitch. Brian was always super honest. He never gave me BS. He was very straightforward. If he didn't think something would work, he would tell me why. And frankly, he taught me a lot about PR. He taught me a lot about how to leverage PR in the tech space in this noisy world effectively. He was part of that sort of experimentation around the consultative approach, talking with customers, talking with the engineers, talking with the sales team. He wanted to understand every single element of the business and be brought along that journey. And as a result, he and I did that together. And so he taught me that valuable lesson. Agency teams should not just be treated as service providers on an island. They should really be woven into your company, treated as equals, extensions of your team, and given more information than you, I think, initially think you would want to give them. I mean, once you sign an NDA, the partnership is there. There's really no reason not to open the kimono completely to them and let them in on what's happening with the business. When we did that, and we were small and we were not super well known, it was only a matter of time before the flywheel started spinning. We started getting coverage. Our founder, Jonathan Cogley, started speaking and getting published in larger publications and magazines. And all of a sudden, now this little engine that could is starting to be a real threat to players that have been in the space much longer than we were. And I attribute so much of that success and that effectiveness to the relationship dynamics that I learned from Brian Alberti.
So that's a great example with a vendor, but as you talked about, there's also the inner workings of the team. And you mentioned that collaborative creativity sparks breakthrough campaigns. You learned this from working with Maya Smith, the former senior director of creative marketing at Tenable, along with Susan Nunziata, the senior director of editorial. So why don't you kind of take us into the room where it happened and how did that collaboration go off?
Yeah, for sure. I was so lucky working with some of the best marketing and communications professionals of my career at Tenable. Tenable has this amazing knack for identifying and hiring incredible talent. And once you're in the mix, they put such an emphasis on that if you know people, right, if you have folks in your network, they're always looking for great people. And it's a great culture. It's an amazing place to work. And I'm very thankful for the time that I had there. And one of the reasons for that is collaborating with incredible leaders like Maya and Susan. Very, very different from my background. Susan came from the editorial world, the IT technology publishing world. She was a journalist. She was an editor. And so she came from, I believe she did a stint at SC Magazine. I could be wrong, SC Media. So she was really from that cyber trade, IT trade pub world. She had done it for so long. One of the best writers I've ever worked with, one of the best editorial strategists and minds I've ever worked with, and really understands the audience because, like I was saying before about PR, the media audience for the right pub is the same as the customers on the vendor side. And Susan had spent 30 years or so understanding how to craft those messages for those CISOs and for those practitioners. And so being able to have her as an in-house leader and a peer of mine, we worked on the same team under the same boss. I learned so much from Susan from an editorial point of view. What you say, how you say it, can really move a needle for a brand. And she was a terrific partner to work with. And then on to the left of me was Maya Smith, who I think is the best creative marketing director in security today. Maya is an amazing visionary mind. She's an incredible designer. She's an incredible brand strategist and brand leader, but she's also a marketer. So she's not, and she's an amazing people manager too. I mean, she's incredible at building and leading creative teams. And so I'll give you an example of how the three of us came together to make some incredible magic happen. I had realized very quickly in the first couple of years of working at Tenable that these were not only amazing people to learn from and have spent many decades in the space building their and honing their craft, but they were also highly collaborative. They wanted my opinion. They wanted me involved in what they were doing. Maya would always pull me into projects, even stuff that I wasn't really tasked to work on. And she would say, "Hey, what do you think about this? I want your honest opinion. Do you think we're heading in the right direction? What do you think?" Susan was very similar. And we started building this sort of collaborative dynamic between us. And there were other folks on the team, like Brian Alberti. He was also in our organization. Maria Nardi, who ran our events, also in our organization. Everyone was very collaborative. But in this particular case, it was a couple of years ago. Tenable was on the verge of launching its very first platform. So not just, here's all our products, here's our bundling of products, but here's our true blue exposure management platform. This is when platformatization was like the hot thing. Everyone was heading into a platform play. And this was a momentous milestone for Tenable in its 20 to 25 years of operations and security to deliver something so broad, so enterprise. It was a huge deal. And at the time, every division within marketing, so you had corporate marketing and communications, which is where we worked. You had demand gen, which is essentially revenue marketing. And then you had product marketing. We're all responsible with coming up with a very detailed strategic plan for the launch of this massive platform. One of the biggest product launches probably in the company's history. And then the idea is that we would work together to interstitch those into the global launch of this product, internally and externally. Well, within corporate marketing, our leader, who I may talk about later, who's amazing, Michaela Stribling, who was our leader at the time, she kind of got the ball rolling and for us. But then she had some stuff she was working on. She was like, you know what? I need to step away for a few weeks. I trust you. Pull the plan together, see what you guys think. I trust the team. So the big boss stepped away, and Maya, myself, and Susan stepped in to take over and essentially run corporate marketing's portion of this product launch. And between Maya's creative mind, Susan's editorial vision, my communications and marketing approach, we pulled our functional teams together across the entire corporate marketing organization. And we developed a plan that was just very intuitive because it didn't have ego. It wasn't like, hey, I need my thing done. We were listening to each other. We were open to each other's critical feedback. We were getting bottom-up feedback from our operating teams, the people that are in the trenches, right? Grinding it out, listening to what they think. We made sure everyone's voice was heard. And we came up with a plan that was one of the most collaborative and strategic rollouts at scale that I've done in my career. And I'll never forget, our boss flew back in on the day that we pitched this to the rest of the marketing department and the CMO at the time. She was seeing this for the first time. And she called me up the night before and she's like, Are we sure? Are you 1,000% sure? Because we get one shot at this, is there anything we could have done differently? And I said, just trust us. I think we got this. And when we pitched it, it was resounding success. The marketing organization loved it. We left space and gave it breathing room so the product marketers can come in and do their thing. We made sure that we had space in there so we were clearly supporting demand gen and revenue gen. And we went to market, and it was one of the most amazing, easy, and seamless product launches I've done, considering the mass scale. I mean, we're talking global outreach rolled out in like 40, 50 countries, huge internal outreach, and customer engagement. I attribute the success of that from the corporate marketing side to the truly collaborative nature of Maya and Susan and their willingness to step out of their egos and link arms and leverage our superpowers together to get this done. And I think we need more of that because sometimes there's some ego in marketing, some ego in PR. And I think when we put that aside and we say, hey, you know more about this area than me, what do you think? We can get so much more done together, collaboratively, with that mindset.
Biggest thing that's helped me in my career is put that ego aside. I love that. So that's an external campaign. Let's talk about an internal campaign because you mentioned Michaela Stribling, who was the former chief communications officer and SVP of corporate marketing at Tenable. One thing you said you learned from working with Michaela was strategic internal comms empower brand resilience. So that was how you were doing things externally. What about internally?
Absolutely. Part of what I was hired to do at Tenable 6 years ago was create the company's first internal communications department and function as part of its corporate communications team and mix. Now, I had spent most of my career up until that point, if not my entire career up until that point, honing my skills as an external communications professional, PR leader, marketing and brand professional. I'd done a little bit of internal comms, but I wouldn't say that that was something I was super experienced in. And so when I was initially talking to Michaela about the role, I said, look, I've never worked exclusively in internal comms. I'm not really like an HR person. I've worked closely with those teams. I understand their needs. And I'm a great partner to those departments, but I'm a marketer. And if you're going to hire me, I'm going to run this function like I would any marketing or PR function. I'm going to treat employees with the same respect and reverence and attention that I would if they were customers, if they were investors or critical external stakeholders. She loved it. She's like, Nick, I'm not looking to hire just another run-of-the-mills internal comms person. I want a marketer, a PR person in this role because I think it needs a different approach to make it successful at Tenable. And at the time, Tenable had maybe gone public a year or two before I joined. Amit Yaron, rest in peace, was doing this incredible job just sort of refreshing the organization, taking it from its legacy operations and injecting a new life and energy and culture into the company. And they had grown tremendously, huge leaps and bounds year over year, adding hundreds and hundreds of new employees year over year. So the company was growing globally, thousands of employees. And it's like, okay, now we need a function to tie all this together and make sure that our employees really understand what's going on. They have the information they need to do their jobs, but they're also aligned on the message, on the mission of the company. They understand where our executives' headspaces are and what their roles are in driving the company forward so that we're steering the ship as one team. We had a core value called One Tenable. That was kind of the driving factor of that idea. So Michaela hires me, not knowing much about internal communications, and said, hey, I'm going to teach you some things because she had run internal comms at Google like right before and then through their IPO. So she had a myriad of resources, ideas, and learnings to share with me. And that was really helpful. So she was a great mentor and a great teacher. But at the same time, she stepped outside the box, said, Nick, this is your world. You run it how you need to run it. You try things, you let me know. Just no surprises. That was her big moniker. No surprises. And as a result, we did some really amazing things. We completely built a new infrastructure around our intranet. We treated it like an external website. We had marketing metrics in place that were never there before: clicks, impressions, reach, all of that kind of stuff that you don't always track internally with employees. We launched a new social advocacy platform so employees could share marketing content to their socials and they became brand ambassadors. We were measuring that. We were completely redefining executive comms. And so we were kind of on this journey to reshape how internal comms was managed and executed at Tenable. And we were having great results. And then COVID-19 hit and the pandemic hit. And let me tell you, you want to talk about a into the frying pan, into the fire learning lesson, especially around the internal communications function. That was it. And during that time, I learned truly the business power, the business value of the internal communications as a function, because it's not just a mechanism to share benefits and to instruct employees to do things. It is really, especially during a crisis, it is a way to keep firm hands on the steering wheel of your business to steer the culture at a time when it can completely drive itself off the rails. And in a global pandemic, in unprecedented circumstances, we needed to make sure that there was business continuity, that we were addressing questions, that we were being transparent, that we were aligning the business because we needed everyone to link arms, hold tight, and shoulder through this uncertainty together. And I learned a ton of lessons during that period there, and how welcomed the other departments were. HR was an incredible partner to us, welcomed our ideas, welcomed our perspective, and taught us a lot along the way about the people management organization and how that downstream impacts employees and what challenges they have. We learned a lot from our legal teams and the legal concerns and challenges with managing a global pandemic in different countries with different laws and different health codes and different requirements, facilities. What do you do when there's certain countries or states where offices can be open and others where they're not? How do you handle that? How do you manage the politics of it all? And being in the trenches with that great cohort of leadership with Michaela's trust, backing, and mentorship taught me more about communications in general, especially internal comms, than I could have ever learned in a workshop or a classroom. And to this day, I still am a big believer that internal communications is not something that should be ignored. It's not something that should be devalued, but it needs to be addressed probably sooner than later in a company's life cycle, because at some point, something's going to happen and you're going to need to get your employees aligned and focused on the mission and excited and feeling good about where they are. And internal comms is one of the key drivers in accomplishing that.
When we talk about communications and collaboration, I wonder, is there anything you learned from improv that you applied to all of this? Because I know we've really focused on your cybersecurity career here, but I see like early in your career, you were a marketing assistant at Bay Area Improv Theater.
That's right.
And I can't help but think, at the end of the day, cybersecurity, we're all just people. It's communications, it's collaboration. So I love asking, a lot of my guests have had really interesting backgrounds before marketing. It's always very interesting the way they take something they learned there and then apply it into their marketing career. So I'm sure cybersecurity, corporate, internal communications, PR, marketing, all this is very different from a little improv theater. But I wonder, were there any transferable lessons that you later applied?
Oh man, Daniel, what a great question. So I grew up in New York City. I am a theater kid at heart. I grew up going to the theater. I grew up performing at my school and local companies, and I love performing arts, and that was an amazing and fun artistic outlet for me as a hobby, growing up. But I also love comedy and making my family laugh, making my friends laugh, and humor is a through line in my life. And I was attracted to improv because of the on your feet energy, the excitement of that performance medium, especially from a comedic lens as a young kid, and having access to great training and performances living in New York City was just like the icing on the cake. And so when I was in college, I was super involved in the theater community. I was actually at one point a theater minor in my undergrad at the University of Tampa. And improv was something that I was always involved in. And it was a troupe. It was a functioning theater organization that I was performing in, but they needed back office help. They needed help, with their marketing and growing their audiences and selling tickets and, that whole thing. And social media was just becoming a thing at this time. This is like 2006, 2007, 8, that time frame. And so they hired me to do their marketing. But at the end of the day, that lesson or those performing lessons, thinking on your feet, listening to what your fellow players are saying, because improv, like most acting, is reacting to what's happening around you. If you're too much in your head and you're only thinking about what line comes next or what you might say that's going to be funny, it could wind up completely derailing the scene and throwing off the whole experience for the audience. And there's a lot of that is a parallel to marketing. As marketers, I think that we are very creative and we're energetic and we have a lot of good ideas. But this now goes back to the collaboration piece. If we're too much in our heads and we're too focused on what we have to say, we're not listening enough. We're not reacting enough. We're not being as collaborative. Improv, the improv that I did was theatrical improv. So you're building a scene with 4 or 5 people on stage, improvising every line, every moment, versus stand-up, which is all focused on you and the audience. And I think the lessons learned about listening, collaborating, knowing when to step in and shine, and knowing when to boost your fellow players or your colleagues and letting them shine. A lot of those lessons I think I've brought into marketing. In fact, one of the reasons I became a marketer was because it was this creative element of business where I could take my writing passion, my creativity passion, my humor, the improv background, and I can actually translate this kind of stuff into business value. And in fact, some of the guys that founded that troupe started consulting companies in which they used improv as leadership training for executives. And you can see a lot of those companies exist today. And a lot of leadership development companies will use improv games and improv techniques to get executives out of their head, being more collaborative, being more creative, because there's, I think, a direct transfer for those skills.
I love that. I love that. All right. Well, if you had to break it down, what are the key qualities of an effective marketer?
Number one, collaboration. We can't do it alone. And I think that there's this either misconception or sometimes this default where marketers either feel or are made to feel that everything lies in their minds and their hands and they have to be miracle workers for a business. But at the end of the day, it's truly about partnerships, learning, listening, collaboration. I think that allows the marketer to generate the best ideas, to pivot and flex where they need to. And even in really small companies where you might be a marketing team of one, you might be the sole person handling comms, PR, advertising, demand, events, the whole thing. Collaboration is still key because we need to be able to understand, A, the needs of the business. So we have to be able to collaborate and talk to and partner with our business partners in the organization, the sales leaders, the finance organization. We have to understand the challenges that HR is facing, trying to create an environment of high performance, but strong culture, et cetera. So collaboration, I think, is one key tenet that we need. And especially right now with market uncertainty, we need more collaboration than ever as a community. And getting out of your ego, putting your listening ear on, and realizing that we can make better things together than just me on my own trying to solve all the problems myself. Number one. Number two, we need to be business people. And when I say that, I mean, we need to truly understand the needs of the business, understand the customer, understand their journey, why they buy, how they buy, what problems they have, the pains, right? Bringing it back to that consultative approach and how we deliver that product or service to them. That whole experience is part of the marketing mix, in my opinion. And the more we know about the business, the more we learn about the functions of the business, especially how they relate and impact the customer experience, the better we'll be, the better equipped we'll be to do what we need to do to generate that demand, that attention, that messaging that truly resonates.
Hey,
And
I'm sorry,
yeah,
go on, Nick.
no, and I had just one last
Yeah,
point.
please.
One last point. And I would say the final thing or the final tenet here is innovation. Get out of your head and every so often learn new things. Always be a student. The first marketing manager leader I ever had, I had an internship again in the theater world, right? Coming out of undergrad, I kind of was living in this space of discovering marketing, but still being involved in theater. And my first actual marketing job as an intern was a marketing comms associate for Theater Development Fund. It's one of the largest performing arts nonprofits in New York City. The TKS ticket booth, get Broadway tickets super cheap. I worked there for about 6 months under the tutelage of a gentleman named Bobby Gore, Robert Gore, but went by Bobby. Brilliant marketer, brilliant businessman, brilliant creative mind, creative strategist. And he taught me something that I've carried with me my whole career and something that I teach up and coming marketers, PR, comms people, and my own teams that I manage. And that is this concept of being a forever student, especially in marketing, technology, media. Things change by the minute. Things evolve. The landscape evolves. How we reach audiences, how we connect, how we tell stories, how customers are consuming information, making buying decisions, and interacting with companies is constantly changing. And I think it's important for us as marketers to make sure that we are also evolving and changing to understand those landscapes and meet the needs of the customers and the market head on. You have a lot of conversations today about AI, ethical queries around the use of AI. And I have all kinds of thoughts on that I won't get into. But it's not to say that it should be ignored. We should figure out how to make it work for us and our needs. Do it in a way that's ethical, but also do it in a way that's effective. It kind of reminds me of when I started my career in marketing, like I was mentioning, social media was becoming a big thing. And I remember the business owners and executives at the time that kind of thought it was a fad and said, nah, we're not going to get onto this social thing. This is just a fad for college kids. We don't believe in it. We don't think this is how we're going to sell our products. And the companies that said, you know what, we think this is the future. We're not sure where this is going to go, but we're going to give it a shot. There's a stark difference in the success and the longevity of the businesses that embrace this newfound technology, this newfound communication landscape, than those that were kind of scared of it or didn't understand it or were too rooted in the older way of doing things. And so innovation, learning, and not being afraid to try different things, especially from our younger practitioners and professionals who have different skills than we do. We need to be listening and learning all the time and not stuck in our ways. And that's how we stay ahead of the game. And that's how we cut through the noise.
Well, thanks for sharing your journey with us, Nick, so we can learn from you.
Thank you so much for having me, Daniel.
And thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketingsherpa.com.